On June 14, 1775, the Second Continental Congress formed the Continental Army as a means for the 13 unified American colonies to fight the forces of Great Britain. George Washington was unanimously elected commander-in-chief of the fledgling army and would lead the colonies to victory and independence. Following the acquisition of the Louisiana Territories in 1804, Army officers Captain Meriwether Lewis and Lieutenant William Clark led an expedition into the western frontier. Lewis and Clark arrived at the Pacific coast about 2 years later, establishing an American presence in the Western Territory. In 1812, still suffering under British enforced trade restrictions and other unsettled disputes from the American Revolution, the United States declared war on Great Britain for the second time. The war was a back-and-forth struggle that is perhaps most notable for the shelling of the Baltimore harbor during the Battle of Baltimore, which became Francis Scott Key's inspiration for his poem, Defense of Fort McHenry, which became the lyrics to The Star-Spangled Banner. In 1846, the United States and Mexico went to war following a period of border tensions. This conflict featured several Army officers who would go on to become important figures in American history, including General Zachary Taylor, General Robert E. Lee, General Ulysses S. Grant, General Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson, and General Winfield Scott. In 1860, after a long-standing dispute over states' rights to allow their citizens to own slaves, Southern states began seceding from the Union. The war that followed would become one of the most important conflicts in American history. During the secession, almost one-third of regular Army officers resigned to join the Confederacy, and more than 3 million American soldiers would serve by the end of the war in 1865. As the United States rebuilt in the aftermath of the Civil War, total Army strength grew slowly until the mid-1900s. The World War I era saw the creation of several important Army branches, including the Veterinarian Corps, the Chemical Corps, and the Aviation Section within the Army Signal Corps, the precursor to our modern Air Force. World War II led to several more milestones in Army history, including the creation of the Office of Strategic Services, which became the Central Intelligence Agency, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt's introduction of the GI Bill. 2 years after the war, the Army established the Medical Services Corps, which was later renamed the Army Medical Department. Following World War II, the United States entered a standoff period with Soviet Russia, known as the Cold War. The tension between these two superpowers led to the conflicts in Korea and Vietnam. During the 1980s, the Army began to reorganize in order to focus on training and technology. By the end of the decade, the Pentagon introduced plans to reduce total Army strength. In 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall signaled the end of the Cold War. In 1991, Americans and Allied forces responded to Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. The ground campaign lasted just 100 hours before a ceasefire was declared. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, American and coalition forces would again enter into a conflict in the Middle East against terrorist forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. Today, the Army is made up of more than 700,000 soldiers, including active duty and Army Reserve personnel. Army soldiers fill many roles. There are doctors, lawyers, and engineers. There are electricians, computer programmers, and helicopter pilots. There are police officers, logistics experts, and civil affairs representatives. The Army's constant need for a diverse range of individual soldiers, each with his or her own expertise, is what sets it apart from other military branches.